And I developed a bunch of stories for use with particular clients, and then started sharing the stories, and then eventually published the stories, because some of them seem to have the same reaction with a variety of people. So we use stories in our moral injury program, but also any kind of trauma, any kind of life adjustment. There are certain stories that are very helpful. And so I have got a PowerPoint to talk about how to use storytelling with clients or anyone really that you're working with. It's not just trauma focused. And I would say Milton Erickson's work is kind of the roots, where Erickson talked a lot about seeding possibilities of change through language. That's what metaphor does. Metaphor gives people a different way of understanding something, right? And maybe possibilities they hadn't seen before. It's a little less direct, which is appealing. If you have clients who might have been defensive, they can be quite receptive to stories or storytelling. So you can go to my next slide. So the benefits of stories, and I like to use stories in combination with art, with play, even for adults with some drawing. It's trans-theoretical. So whatever background you come from, stories can be used in any theoretical orientation. They're kind of universal, all right? And there are things that affect adverse childhood experiences. Adults who had adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, trauma, there's a neurobiological impact, like at a brain level, that can affect development. It can affect executive functioning, people's ability to concentrate, pay attention. It can affect their mood. They can appear more agitated or hyperactive. Maybe they don't sleep well. But stories, art, and play have neurobiological benefit. They facilitate that aha, access to feelings, access to sensory memories, and story is less threatening than direct discussion. In fact, it's a good springboard to take you from a topic into the client will often talk more after hearing the story. So once you can feel it and hear it and experience that aha, now you can talk about it. For trauma, that's important, I think, because if you approach trauma head on, a lot of people drop out of treatment or they stop coming in. But if you approach trauma with story and metaphor, Tim mentioned the lament. Boy, when we ask them to pick a metaphor for their lament, pick a metaphor for what it is they went through that changed them and left them feeling broken, they zoom right in on, I picked number 5. That's my metaphor. This is how I feel after I've gone through this terrifying, awful experience. And it's pretty uncanny. Someone once challenged me and said, well, veterans won't want to do stories, you know, especially these Marines, right? They're tough. They're not going to listen to stories. They're not going to draw. Are you kidding? Yes, they do. In fact, they welcome the opportunity to express more deeply what they've experienced. Next. So I have to give thanks to Milton Erickson. He says play and metaphor are right hemisphere dominant, but they get integrated with language to get meaning applied. So if you start with experiential, you get to the feelings and the sensory and the aha, and then you can put words to it. A lot of people who go through trauma, they don't have words for it. They have a hard time describing what it is, the pain that they've experienced, but they can describe it in a drawing or a metaphor, and now they can talk about it. Erickson talked about utilization. All that means is whatever the person presents to you, the symbols, the symptoms, the behaviors, you can use what they give you and help them reshape it, help them reformulate it, help them come up with new understanding of it. So metaphors establish connections that don't require consciousness. It's kind of a pre-conscious. If you have read Friedman's Fables by Edwin Friedman, he writes a couple of books of spiritually focused meaning, existential, and he reads the story or tells the story to the people he's working with. And it can lead into some great pastoral care. One of Friedman's fables that I borrow for therapy is about a man walking across a bridge, and he's, you know that one? Yep. He has just realized where he's going in life, right? He's full of this forward motion, and a person meets him on the bridge, hands him a rope, says, "Would you hold this for a minute?" And he's a helpful guy. He says, "Sure." And then the guy jumps off the bridge. So he's holding the rope of a stranger. And in the process of their interaction, he kind of says, "Well, you know, can you help me a little?" He says, "No, just hold the rope." "Well, I'd like to get you up so that I can go on my way." He says, "No, I'll just hang here. That's fine. You know, you've got the rope. It's your responsibility now, basically." And he says, "I can't hold you forever. Could you roll yourself up? Could we work together? Could we solve the problem?" And the guy says, "No, no, just hold the rope." And finally, the gentleman on the bridge realizes a truth, and he looks over and he says, "Well, thank you for your decision." And he lets go of the rope and goes on his way. It's a fabulous fable about caring for others and whether we are taking responsibility for them that they need to take for themselves. It's just a great story. Am I holding the rope? What a metaphor. Am I holding the rope? Am I holding a rope I need to let go of? Do I get to get on with my life? Next slide. So you've probably heard of, Erickson talked about paradoxical language. So you give someone a paradox, a metaphor, a double bind, prescribing the symptom, go do it, go do more of it. Reframing, redefining, focusing on choice in problems, encouragement, not confrontation, and using resistance, not blaming the client for them not following through. Probably it's because we've asked them to do something that is not going to be helpful to them. And then he introduced storytelling and humor. Next slide. So whether you're a chaplain or a mental health person or spiritual caregiving, storytelling and using metaphor is collaborative. It's strengths-based. It reduces this learned helplessness. It improves self-efficacy. It allows them a new context, a shift, like an aha. It allows previously unrealized solutions to be accessible, the as yet unconnected to become connected. And he assumes, and I do as well, solutions are within the person, and we can seed change, and we can be really good catalysts for change, but the change comes from the person. And storytelling and metaphor lets them access their own resources, and it's a genuine, trusting, transparent way of being open in relationships, very choice focused and solution oriented. Next. So when we work with whoever we work with, whatever setting you're in, I think we're all trauma informed. We need to be aware of the possibility of someone having been through traumatic experiences that leave them feeling abandoned, changed, betrayed, hopeless, and attachment and trauma. Attachment, which is that basic trust we get in other people, that's grounded in neurobiology. And so our work with others is an attuned relationship, and that alliance creates a sense of being felt out of a deep resonance, attunement, empathy, and good fit. And metaphor gives our people we work with a sense of really being understood. They get it, we get it, and then we elaborate. Next. So metaphor is a form of symbolic communication. I call it a universal shorthand, like a Morse code. It sends a complete message in just a few clicks, just a few words. That metaphor expands understanding. And when clients use metaphors, they are giving you clues to their experience, to how they represent themselves and others. And some of it is kind of outside their conscious awareness. So it helps make the unconscious conscious. And by reflecting on what they're offering to you, they feel understood. Now, common themes in story, art, and play, common metaphors that you will see come up with people you work with: conquering, fearlessness versus courage, disorganization and chaos, power and control themes. You know, many of the mythical stories, right, have monsters, and they have kind of an enemy, and they have someone who conquers the enemy. Even Disney uses a lot of metaphors. You know, there's always some malevolent person who violates your values. But in metaphor like Disney, guess what? The good guy wins. The good guy always wins in Disney. But in real life, the good guy does not always win. And it helps to reflect with the people we work with that evil people sometimes prevail, that justice is not always done. There is room for righteous indignation over wrongdoing. And there are many questions we get in treatment of, you know, where is God in all this, right? And sometimes they come down in group, they come to the conclusion, well, God was with me, but God did not order this terrible thing to happen to me. That was at the hands of men. That was in the choices of others. That was an enemy planting a bomb. But that was not planned for me, because people who have bad things happen to them sometimes feel singled out. They feel as though someone wanted them to suffer. And it's a struggle. It's a spiritual struggle. Next slide. You know, just like Disney, one of the things the veterans struggle with is, I'm not sure I want to forgive. We talk about acceptance and forgiveness therapy. What are they accepting? they're accepting that they can't change what happened, and that justice is not always served. And they're forgiving by letting go. They're releasing the bad that happened and not carrying it around. Here's our metaphor, not swallowing poison and destroying yourself in the process. We tell stories about kind of end the session with metaphor and quotes. And one of the greatest quotes was, wanting revenge is like sitting down, drinking poison, and waiting for the other person to die. It's a really good metaphor for what happens when you carry around bitterness, when you carry around this unforgiving anger or rage. And so forgiveness doesn't mean I have to like you, but it does mean I don't have to hate you. Hate is active and it's directed at someone, but neither do I have to carry the pain that has defined me for so long. So metaphor can be about damage. It can be about healing. It can be about pain. So storytelling, I don't know, you can learn a lot about someone if they draw a picture and tell you about themselves. We use I think I'll be showing you an example in a little bit of, we use the metaphor of a cracked or damaged glass bowl. And that could be anybody. In the story, the bowl survives a hurricane and is very broken. And then there is the metaphor of healing, which is going to a glassmaker and melting the cracks from the inside out and enduring the heat. And the healing becomes, you're not hiding your cracks, you're sealing your cracks. And there may well be evidence of them too, but you are now a beautiful new creation that has gone through restoration. They love that metaphor, and they draw themselves as the cracked bowl, and then they draw themselves as a restored new creation. And that can apply to anyone who's been through a difficult time, who has endured pain. And with some hope and healing, there is some hope and restoration. All right, next. So when you're telling stories with clients, you can do one of two things. You can co-create a story where you guide, but they develop the story. And you can also do a facilitator directed story, like where you pick a story that has a theme and a purpose that relates to the clients. Yes. And what time did you want to be done, Tim, for Q&A? Is it a 1 hour? Are we a 1 hour?
Yeah, we're supposed to be done at 2. If we can, yeah.
Okay.
We can take some time at the end for questions if we can.
Sure. So let's, think about co-creating could be as simple as, I had a client in my office and she didn't have a story, but she felt helpless. And here's this powerful woman who, she was a PhD who taught English, but she's falling apart. And I said, have you forgotten that you're a mermaid? And she said, oh my gosh, I can just flip my tail and dive deep, can't I? And we created a story together of a mermaid who, you don't try to swim through the storm. You dive deep, you go below the storm, and then you survive. And That was her metaphor. All right, next. I'm not going to do this, but I gave you this. Usually if I give a longer workshop, we do one, and it's an art therapy technique called squiggles. And one person puts like a marker on a dry erase board and draws a squiggle with their eyes closed, and then hands the pen to the other person, and they make a picture out of the squiggle, and they tell a story about it. And the story reveals something about them, because you say, give me a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then you pass the pen back and forth, and you create stories, and whoever's the leader can insert some other ways of looking at the story or creating a new ending to the story. Next slide. So people who tell stories are often revealing something about themselves. Just be aware, you probably already are, that people reveal their own inner experiences in storytelling. Next. And I talked about utilization earlier, so go on. Don't assume that what people tell you is literally true. It might be symbolic, it might be metaphorical, but if you pick up on the theme, you can relate that to the person's concerns. And these are some concerns that come out in storytelling. Next. Those are just the covers of 2 of my storybooks. Next. So you pick a story to address an issue. So some of the stories we've used at any age are, there's one about Lucky the junkyard dog. And it's a really good story for someone who felt abandoned by their parents or were abused by their parents. And it's about not trusting others after that happens. And how do you get trust back? And just like an abused dog, you might have symptoms of PTSD, but with loving care and time, you might learn to trust again. I told you about the cracked glass bowl. The first part of the story is about going through any adverse life experience and feeling broken, damaged, or changed. We've never had a veteran, or even when I used to do this in the community, everyone has had an experience that was enough difficult that they felt damaged or changed and wanted to get back to health, wanted to get back to their old self. You'd have a chronic illness and feel broken, damaged, or changed. And then you can talk about how you go to the glassmaker and how do you restore or recover from that damaging time. Next. We tell the story often of the burden bag. The burden bag is a wonderful generic story about a rabbit that has a bag of burdens or rocks on his back, and he can't hop anymore. He's so weighed down by his burdens. And at the invitation of a friend, he shows what they are. And guess what? Some of them aren't even his. He's carrying around this heavy stuff that he has carried for years. So you can have people label what would be in their burden bag. What are they carrying around? What are they willing to release? And in the story, he tosses some of the burdens into a bottomless lake that has a no fishing sign, and it's called God's Pond. So you can work with people on this letting go, volitional release, and not fishing it back out again. We use a story called the self-weaving tapestry to put dark and light in balance. And so in this story, each person, it's kind of a Harry Potterish kingdom. When you're born, a tapestry starts weaving itself on your wall, and dark threads come with dark times and bright thread come with good times. And this person doesn't like the dark threads, so she removes them and locks them in a closet. And that is not the solution. It is not the dark threads that are the problem. It is weaving them in the right places and seeing the whole. And so she finds the whole by taking her dark threads back out of the closet and weaving them back into the whole and seeing the beauty in that. And the veterans all draw a tapestry and label their dark threads and their light threads and find some way to integrate them. Next. So you can ask questions after a story. You can ask questions like, what are you carrying in your burden bag? What's hard to let go of? I wonder what you might release. And in the very end of the story, we talk about replacing the burdens with blessings. So you can shift to some discussion of gratitude and filling the bag with blessings. And of course, you can make a burden bag if you choose to. You can have them put their hands on and put it together. Next. I'll finish up in just a minute or two. Go on from this. Want you to see some drawings that veterans have done to depict their feeling broken, damaged, or changed. It's so creative, and all we do is read them first half of the story and ask them to draw themselves as a cracked bowl. You can see they're all different. They're one of a kind. This has fire around it, and his cracks were spreading into his supports. I have a hard time believing how beautiful these creations are, that they pull from within. Next. So take a look at this from a 72-year-old Vietnam veteran, and he drew his bowl with, labeled his damages, and then his complete transformation, hope, faith, and love. Go to the next slide and I'll show you what he said about it. He said he felt responsible for the deaths of others. His first bowl, he said, this is my old cup, scars all over my body, scars inside of me in my heart that hurt, water coming out of it. I was going to take my life and got referred to this group. I really want to be here. The group's been really helpful. I have a new outlook. And then he shared his new cup and he said, this is my new cup, a whole new transformation. I played my guitar and I was praying in Spanish while I sang to God, you're the clay maker, I'm the clay, transform me into a new being. And God said, I will make you right through fire. I want you to praise me, learn how to forgive. I want your smiles. And we didn't know he was suicidal until he shared this. Next slide. He said, hope, faith, love. I learned that from you guys. I have hope now. I came so close to pulling the trigger. In the Marine Corps, they said, we never leave nobody behind. That ain't true. We are human, we bleed, and we cry. Not as tough as they say we have to be. I don't want to take my life. For once I'm spending more time with my family. My faith is back. I'm back with God. I'm a work in progress. So we find these metaphors and stories very powerful. We're never sure what we're going to see. Next. Next. These are some of the tapestries. I just wanted you to see the visual on how unique they are and how they help the veterans label the dark and bright threads of their lives. Next. So summary, metaphor is a powerful means of communication. Stories can be co-created, created on the spot, or even selected with a theme in mind. Both adults and children are receptive to metaphor and story. You can even say to someone, this reminds me of a story. Can I tell you a story? And you pick a story. I've got books of them if you want to borrow themes. And they take people to a different part of the brain and they have a deep understanding. All right, I think I'm done and I can take questions.
Hi, Pat. This is Miriam. This is so exciting and good. Where do we find your stories? I want to be able to say them without reading them to people. So I need to internalize
Yes,
them.
what I like is to just even pick a story and just tell a little piece of it, right? Or throw out the metaphor. So the two books that are on one of the slides, if you go to routledge.com, Routledge is my publisher. They often have discounts going and sometimes they're cheaper than Amazon. But if you look Pernicano, you'll see my two most recent. The one has the girl on the front, and actually don't get that one. That's case studies. But the other one, sorry, the one that shows the funny faces, cartoons all over the cover, that's a collection of most of my stories. It's using stories, art, and play. Yeah, the one, see the reddish one with the funny cartoons. Yeah, that has just about all the stories. It's not too expensive. You'll enjoy them because they're quirky. And people who are doing things, you can throw a story out and they aren't offended. Like there was a woman who kept an abuser in her home and she wanted her grandchildren to visit and it wasn't safe. And so there was a story about a grandma who had an alligator in her house and she got it as a baby, but as it grew, right, the alligator was kind of dangerous and threatening. And one of the kids said, Grandma, I don't think I want to come over here unless that alligator is in a cage. And Grandma says, well, he won't hurt you. And the kid says, I don't think we can take that chance, you know. So sometimes the wisdom comes out of the mouths of children. And then the adult goes, oh, maybe I'm doing something myself that's not safe, right? You'll be able to, just like I can kind of tell Friedman's, nutshell. Friedman's are very cognitive stories, but they have a deep aha. Like you never expect he's going to just let go of the rope. And then you say, well, what else can he do? The other person made his decision, Comments, other comments or questions or? I apologize, I couldn't cover everything. I usually do this in a 2 or 3 hour, workshop.
The compressed form. I've noticed when people, I talk to veterans about how our minds think in stories and in metaphors. So like even
Yes.
when we dream,
Yes.
the dream is a story that deals with some unresolved issue or a resolved issue that happened in the day. But we talk about in chaplaincy the idea of listening to a narrative, and the narratives that a patient chooses to share with us is the unresolved part of their
Yes.
story, and we're listening for what that picture is in there. And we've used the crack glass bowl all the time on if you could picture yourself the way you see your soul in the mirror.
Wow.
Draw that down in a bowl, and I'll usually draw mine to give an example, and they go. It's like you say, Pat. It's interesting. That's not a hard concept. You would think it would be.
Well, there's one of the veterans had drawn his bowl as he'd put a mirror and on the outside of the mirror was what he shows everybody. So it looked perfect, right? And the inside, it was all cracked. The reflection was broken. And so you could easily say, here's a mirror, draw yourself what you show others, and then show what you see on in your inner soul, right? What do you see in yourself? And you'll be amazed. And they're not all bowls. We get things in pieces, or there's bullet holes, or there's leaking bases. They've lost their base. Well, that's metaphorical, because someone who has a hole through him, right, is different than someone who's lost his base completely. And the other one that's shattered, you know, totally shattered, you'll learn a lot about what they're seeing in themselves.
How would you guys see this, using this in a like a visit? Sorry, somebody had a question.
Oh, I just wanted to comment on how wonderful this is. And I've been thinking about this, using play,
Yes.
you know, as a way to communicate. It's a wonderful form of communication. I was listening to NPR last night, and they had a bit on the TED Radio Hour. There was a female activist, Yana Buer, or I think it was her name, who uses play in activism in order to make it relatable and interactive and spark some sense of creativity within a person that makes things more meaningful. And
Yes.
I feel like maybe something similar is going on with what you're doing.
Well, you know, you can use art too for if someone's having like a nightmare, and you say, draw, right, draw the nightmare, but draw it with a new ending, and create a solution in the nightmare where you win. Whatever the other action is, keep it the same, but change it. And so this woman's nightmare was her abuser showing up, right, at a campground where she and her husband were, and terrorizing them. And so the change, and I couldn't have created this, her story was he showed up, but they were waiting for him. And there was a magician who turned him into an animal. And then they shipped him on a ship to Thailand, and he was turned into like an alligator purse or an armadillo purse or something. And the minute she created the new ending, she started to laugh. And the fear was gone. She had revised, see, her narrative, her story about being in danger, and she was the protagonist. She won. So people can, and she drew a picture of it, and she giggled as she wrapped him in duct tape and put him on a freighter, you know. It was great. So I think you help people share their pain, but then do something to become empowered. Have an intervention where, whether it's clay or art or make-believe, it can become real at a feeling level.
When you draw it.
Yep, draw it, tell it. They will often draw, there's a story, Up the Mountain, and they lock whatever they need to in a cage at the foot of the mountain. And they have to draw the cage and whatever's protecting, because you have to have locks, you have to have guards, and you have to have the key. So they lock things in this cage, and they duct tape them, and they put fire ants on them, and they have all kinds of protective guards. And then they climb a mountain. And as they climb the mountain, they draw the mountain. They climb this beautiful mountain, and they look down on that cage. And you know how things are when they get smaller and smaller and smaller. So as they tell the story and they draw the mountain and the cage loses its power. And whatever they've put in the cage, they get distance, and they can look down on it like you're going up in an airplane and you see the cars become like little toys and everything is so small. And when we did that story with one older teen, he said, they're like a bunch of little ants down there. They can't hurt me. And then he stomped on it. He actually created in clay and paper his cage, and then he stomped it. It was very powerful. So yeah, using art, it empowers, and it can take some of the fear out of it. My mermaid lady, eventually she bought herself a mermaid statue, a little one, to keep on her desk. And that was her mantra, or her reminder, that when she got really stressed, she could dive deep below the storm.
Well, Pat, this has all just been wonderful. I'm just absolutely loving it. A lot of the stuff that I've gone through as a individual person on the receiving end of therapy with EMDR and different things, there's a lot of opportunities for drawing and stuff that I've found to be really helpful.
Yes.
And I just love everything that you're sharing. I just absolutely love it. And I have a question, Chaplain. Do you have any advice for us in how to kind of stay within our scope of practice without finding ourselves in a position of getting too deep into therapy?
Yeah, I think, you just stay at the level of like, listen to what they're saying, and then find the metaphor you're getting, right? And hand the metaphor back to them, either as a reflection or an empathic comment, right? You're not becoming a therapist, but you're empathizing with them in the moment. I mean, anyone could say, have you forgotten you're a mermaid? And what I was saying to her was, you're a very powerful woman with many skills, and you can use them, right? Right where you are. And she, being an English teacher and an English major, she just delighted in thinking of herself as a mermaid with this powerful tail, right? And I think most people you're with, you'll hear, as you practice it, you'll hear a metaphor. You'll hear oh, wow. Here's one someone will say, I should be further along. Why am I having such a hard time with this? I said, yep. I said, gosh, that's like the day after the tornado hits and there's devastation all around. And you look at it and you say, why haven't I cleaned it up yet? They laugh. It's like, yeah, okay, a tornado, it's going to take some time, right? You don't even expect to have it all cleaned up in a day. And then they go, well, so why do I expect to have my life cleaned up when I just heard I have cancer, or I just found out, right? And they put it in a new context. They put it in perspective, and the feelings change.
Awesome. So everybody, we're kind of at our 2 hours. Tim had to jump off because he's got somewhere he needs to be. Is there any last question that we could address before we close up? Okay.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
I enjoyed it very much.
Have a wonderful day, and thank you all for being here and supporting Pat in this great work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Pat.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Pat.